When Victoria Chen walked into Riverside Children's Home at 2:15 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon during the monthly adoption event where prospective parents met children hoping for families, where the playroom had been decorated with balloons and refreshments and the particular forced cheerfulness of institutions trying to make trauma look appealing, and saw 12-year-old Amara Williams sitting alone in her wheelchair in the corner of the playroom while every other child was introduced to visitors and given chances to be seen, to smile and answer questions and demonstrate that they were worthy of families. She expected the staff to explain that maybe Amara was shy or needed time to warm up to strangers, that perhaps she'd been introduced earlier and was taking a break, that there was some reasonable explanation for why this child was positioned in the corner like furniture that didn't quite fit the room's aesthetic. But it wasn't shyness. It wasn't Amara needing time to adjust to strangers or preferring to observe before engaging, or any of the gentle explanations that might have made the isolation seem temporary or chosen. It wasn't an oversight or accident. Wasn't staff simply forgetting to introduce one child among 15 available for adoption? Wasn't the kind of mistake that happens when events are busy and people are overwhelmed. It was the orphanage staff deliberately keeping Amara hidden because they'd decided that a 12-year-old black girl in a wheelchair was unadoptable, that no one would choose a child with disabilities when healthy younger children were available, that introducing her to prospective parents was wasting everyone's time, because who would voluntarily take on the medical complications and accessibility challenges and the particular responsibility of raising a child whose body didn't work the way society expected bodies to work? And when Victoria asked after watching staff walk past Amara repeatedly for 10 minutes, after observing how carefully they avoided making eye contact with her, after noticing that every other child had been introduced to at least 3 different families, while Amara sat alone drawing in a sketchbook like she'd learned that expecting attention was pointless. What about her, the girl in the corner? Why hasn't anyone introduced her? The director said with the casual dismissiveness of someone who'd explained this many times before. Oh, you don't want her? She's complicated. The word carrying years of institutional ableism compressed into one adjective that suggested Amara's worth could be evaluated and found insufficient based entirely on the wheelchair that held her body. She needs special care, the director continued, listing obstacles designed to discourage interest rather than facilitate connection. Medical issues, accessibility requirements. It's expensive and time-consuming, and honestly, most families can't handle it. You'd want a younger child, a healthier child, someone without complications. And Victoria realized with devastating clarity that she wasn't witnessing an adoption event. She was witnessing systematic erasure of a child deemed unworthy of a family. Watching institutional ableism disguise itself as practical concern. Seeing how easily people in positions of authority could decide that some children deserve families and others deserve to age out of the system alone. Victoria Chen was 45 years old and had spent the last 20 years building a tech company from startup to $4.2 billion empire. Had become one of the most successful Asian American women in Silicon Valley, had accumulated wealth beyond anything her immigrant parents could have imagined when they'd worked in restaurants to put her through college. She'd never married, had no biological children, had spent decades focusing exclusively on her career with the particular intensity of someone who'd learned early that success required sacrifice. That building something extraordinary meant giving up the traditional markers of family and domesticity that society expected from women. But 10 years ago, her younger sister had died in a car accident. Her sister, who'd had cerebral palsy and used a wheelchair her entire life, who Victoria had protected and advocated for since they were children, who taught Victoria more about resilience and joy than any business success ever could. Victoria remembered how people had treated her sister, how strangers had spoken to Victoria instead of directly to her sister, as if disability meant incompetence, how institutions had made everything harder than it needed to be, how her sister had faced barriers that had nothing to do with her capabilities and everything to do with society's failure to accommodate difference. After her sister's death, after a decade of grief that success couldn't fill and money couldn't heal, Victoria had decided to adopt, had decided that maybe the empty spaces in her life weren't meant to be filled with more work or more wealth, but with family, with giving someone the chance her sister had deserved, with using her resources to change one child's life, the way she wished she could have changed the systems that had made her sister's life unnecessarily difficult. She'd come to the adoption event alone, no spouse because she'd never found partnership that mattered more than independence, looking specifically for an older child because babies were easy to place and teenagers needed families too, wanting to give someone a chance who'd been waiting, who'd been overlooked, who needed someone to see them. Amara Williams was 12 years old and had been born with spina bifida, a condition that affected her spine and meant she'd used a wheelchair her entire life, meant her body worked differently than bodies were expected to work, meant she required accessibility in medical care and the particular accommodations that society treated as burdens rather than basic human rights. Her parents had died in a house fire when she was 5, had left her alone in a world that viewed her wheelchair as liability rather than simply part of who she was, had left her to navigate the foster system as a disabled Black girl, which meant facing compounded discrimination from institutions that didn't want to deal with either her race or her disability. She'd been at Riverside Children's Home for 7 years, longer than any other current resident, had watched 47 other children get adopted while she remained, had learned through brutal repetition that families chose other kids, younger kids, able-bodied kids, kids who wouldn't require ramps and accessible bathrooms, and the ongoing medical care that spina bifida sometimes required. She was intelligent and articulate, despite staff treating her like her wheelchair affected her mind, was artistic and talented at drawing, despite no one encouraging her gifts, because why invest in developing talents for a child who'd probably never leave, believe she'd never have a family, because 7 years of evidence suggested she was right, that she was what staff called her behind closed doors when they thought she couldn't hear, a broken kid that no one wanted. At 2:15 p.m. at Riverside Children's Home, the monthly adoption event was beginning with 15 children available and prospective parents arriving to meet them, staff introducing the younger children first because youth was currency in adoption markets, showing off the able-bodied kids who could run and play and wouldn't require home modifications or medical expertise, operating from the assumption that Amara wasn't worth introducing, because why waste visitors' time with a 12-year-old in a wheelchair when adorable 6-year-olds were available, when healthy children were easier to place, when Amara had been there 7 years and no one had chosen her yet, which surely meant no one ever would. Victoria noticed Amara immediately, not because the child was making herself visible, but because the child was being made invisible. Positioned in the corner with her sketchbook-like staff had placed her somewhere out of sight, somewhere prospective parents wouldn't have to see her and feel uncomfortable about not choosing her. Somewhere, her wheelchair wouldn't remind people that disabled children existed and needed families too. Victoria watched staff walk past Amara repeatedly without introducing her to any of the families touring the playroom. Watched how carefully they avoided eye contact. Watched how they guided prospective parents toward other children with the subtle steering of people who decided which kids were worth their effort. "What about her?" Victoria asked after 10 minutes of observation, after confirmation that this wasn't oversight but policy, pointing toward Amara who was drawing alone in the corner. "Why hasn't anyone introduced her?" "Oh, you don't want her," the director said with the casual cruelty of someone who didn't even recognize their words as cruel, who'd normalized ableism so completely that suggesting a disabled child was unwantable felt like helpful guidance rather than discrimination. "She's complicated, needs special care, medical issues. You'd want a younger, healthier child." Every word designed to discourage interest, to protect prospective parents from the supposed burden of disabled children, to maintain the system that kept kids like Amara invisible and unadopted. If you believe every child deserves to be seen regardless of whether they use a wheelchair, subscribe to Love is Kindness for stories about the children society treats as invisible. Have you ever noticed how disabled children are treated differently in systems that should protect them? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. At 2:20 p.m., 5 minutes after the director had dismissed Amara as too complicated for anyone to want, Victoria said with the calm authority of someone who'd spent 20 years commanding boardrooms and refusing to accept no as final answer. "Let me talk to her," a simple request that shouldn't have required negotiation, but in institutions built on ableism, even basic conversation with disabled children was treated as problematic. "She's not really available," the director said, the phrase absurd given they were at an adoption event where children were supposedly available for adoption, where the entire point was connecting children with prospective parents. But available apparently had conditions, had limitations, had exceptions for children whose wheelchairs made them inconvenient. "What does that mean?" Victoria asked, forcing the director to articulate the discrimination she was attempting to disguise as logistics, forcing her to explain why one child among 15 was being deliberately excluded from the process every other child was participating in. "She has special needs," the director said, listing familiar justifications that Victoria recognized from years of hearing them applied to her sister. "Medical complications. It's expensive. Most families can't handle the accessibility requirements and the ongoing care. And honestly, we're trying to save you time by steering you toward children who'd be easier to integrate into your life." "I didn't ask if she had special needs," Victoria said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the institutional politeness that disguised cruelty as concern. "I asked to talk to her. Not for a medical assessment or financial breakdown or your opinion on whether I can handle raising a disabled child. I asked to speak with her. Now either let me talk to her or explain to me why a child at an adoption event isn't allowed to meet prospective parents." The director reluctantly agreed, her discomfort obvious, her body language suggesting Victoria was making a mistake, but she couldn't explicitly forbid conversation without admitting the discrimination that was supposed to remain unspoken. At 2:25 p.m., Victoria approached Amara in the corner where she'd been sitting alone for over an hour, while every other child had been introduced to multiple families. Approached carefully because she understood from her sister that disabled people learn to be defensive, learn to protect themselves from people who pretended interest and then disappeared. Amara didn't look up from her sketchbook, had learned that eye contact invited rejection, that keeping her head down meant avoiding the moment when adults realized her wheelchair made her unsuitable for whatever they'd been considering. "Hi," Victoria said gently, kneeling beside Amara's wheelchair so they were at eye level, so she wasn't talking down literally or figuratively. "I'm Victoria. What are you drawing?" "Why do you care?" Amara asked, her 12-year-old voice carrying the particular suspicion of children who'd been disappointed too many times, who'd learned that adults asking questions didn't mean adults actually caring about answers. That interest was usually performance that preceded leaving. "Because it looks beautiful," Victoria said honestly, not deflecting the suspicion but addressing it directly. "And because I'm genuinely interested. Can I see?" Amara hesitated, then showed her the sketchbook, a drawing of a family, mother and father and child holding hands. The lines careful and skilled beyond what Victoria expected from a 12-year-old, showing talent that should have been encouraged and developed, but probably wasn't, because why invest in art supplies for a child who'd probably age out of the system? "Is this your family?" Victoria asked, though she already knew the answer, already understood what the drawing represented. "No," Amara said, her voice flat with the particular resignation of someone stating facts they'd accepted, even though acceptance hurt. "I don't have a family. This is what I wish I had." Victoria processed what she was seeing with the systematic assessment she'd developed building companies and evaluating opportunities, but now applying that analysis to understanding exactly what institutional ableism looked like in practice, cataloging evidence that would support what she already knew, that the unadoptable label attached to Amara had nothing to do with the child's actual capabilities or challenges, and everything to do with societal prejudice disguised as practicality. Amara was sitting in the corner alone, while other kids were center of attention, positioned where prospective parents wouldn't see her unless they specifically looked, treated like her presence might damage the marketability of other children. Staff hadn't introduced her once in over an hour, despite introducing every other child multiple times. The exclusion deliberate and systematic, policy not oversight. Amara expected to be ignored, her defensive, suspicious response to Victoria's interest, showing she'd learned that adults didn't genuinely care, that questions were usually preludes to rejection, that protecting herself meant not hoping. Her drawing showed longing for family, not toys or things, or material comfort, but just the basic human connection of belonging to people who chose you, the simplest wish that 7 years in an orphanage hadn't fulfilled. She was intelligent and articulate despite being labeled complicated, spoke with the clarity of someone whose mind worked perfectly, even if her body worked differently, demonstrated none of the intellectual challenges the complicated label implied. She'd been at Riverside for 7 years, which was longer than most children stayed, was older than the age prospective parents typically wanted, carried both disability and age as marks against her in adoption markets that valued youth and able-bodiedness. Other visitors hadn't even noticed her, or had chosen not to notice, had walked past her corner repeatedly without asking questions or expressing interest, participating in the collective erasure that let institutions keep disabled children invisible. And the unadoptable label was about ableism, not about Amara's actual challenges, was about society's unwillingness to accommodate wheelchairs and medical needs, was about prejudice masquerading as practical concern for what families could handle. At 2:30 p.m., Victoria asked the questions that mattered, the questions that would tell her what Amara had experienced and what Victoria could offer. "How long have you been here?" 7 years, Amara said, The number carrying weight that 7-year-olds shouldn't have to carry. 7 years of watching other children leave while you stay. 7 years of learning that you're the exception, the child people don't choose. Since I was 5, my parents died in a fire. I'm sorry, Victoria said. Genuine sympathy without pity, acknowledging loss without making it defining characteristic. That must have been so hard. Amara shrugged with the practiced casualness of someone who'd learned that showing pain made adults uncomfortable. It was a long time ago. Have people come to meet you at these events? Victoria asked, though she already knew from observation what the answer would be. Needed to hear Amara articulate what institutional erasure felt like from inside it. Amara laughed, the sound bitter and knowing, the laugh of 12-year-olds who'd learned that honesty about discrimination made adults defensive, so sometimes laughter was safer than anger. No, they don't introduce me. They say I'm too old, too broken. No one wants a kid in a wheelchair. Every sentence stating facts that shouldn't be facts, truths that shouldn't be true, reality that should have been changed 7 years ago, but instead had been normalized until even Amara believed she was unwantable. I do, Victoria said simply. The 2 words carrying commitment she hadn't fully planned, but knew with absolute certainty the moment she spoke them. What? Amara said, confusion and disbelief mixing in her voice because adults didn't say things like that to disabled children at orphanages, didn't express wanting when everything in Amara's experience taught her she was unwanted. I want to adopt you, Victoria said clearly, making sure Amara understood this wasn't conditional or theoretical. If you'll let me. If you're willing to take a chance on me being your mother. You're lying, Amara said immediately, defensiveness returning stronger. 7 years of disappointment creating armor that 2 sentences couldn't penetrate. Everyone lies. Adults come here, and they ask questions, and they seem interested, and then they leave and choose someone else. Someone younger. Someone who can walk, someone who won't need ramps and accessible bathrooms and medical appointments. You'll leave like everyone else. You'll realize I'm too much work and you'll disappear. I'm not everyone else, Victoria said, understanding that words alone wouldn't convince Amara, that trust would take time and consistency and proof through action, but needing to start somewhere, needing to offer something beyond empty promises. My sister used a wheelchair. She had cerebral palsy her entire life. I watched people treat her like she was invisible, like her wheelchair meant she wasn't worth knowing, like disability erased every other part of who she was. I won't do that to you. I can't bring my sister back, but I can make sure you don't spend one more day believing you're unworthy of a family. At 2:35 p.m., Victoria made promises she intended to keep. Promises that would require months of bureaucracy and paperwork and proving to courts that she was a suitable parent. Promises that would cost time and money and emotional investment with no guarantee of success. But that felt more important than any business decision she'd ever made. I'm not going to lie to you, Amara, she said, treating the 12-year-old as intelligent enough to handle truth, as deserving of honesty rather than false reassurance. Adoption takes time. There's paperwork and background checks and home studies and court hearings. It might be months before you can come home with me. The system moves slowly, and there are processes we have to follow. But I'm not leaving without starting that process today, Victoria continued. Commitment replacing conditional interest. And I'm going to visit you every single week until the adoption is finalized. Every Saturday I'll be here. We'll draw together or talk or just spend time so you know I'm not disappearing. So you can learn to trust that I mean what I'm saying. So you understand that wanting to adopt you isn't impulse but choice I'm making deliberately and permanently. Why? Amara asked through tears that had started falling, despite her attempt to maintain the defensive armor that had protected her through 7 years of rejection. Why me? Why would you choose a broken kid in a wheelchair when you could have anyone? Because you deserve a family, Victoria said. The answer simple and complicated simultaneously. Because being in a wheelchair doesn't make you less worthy of love and belonging and someone choosing you. Because I have a big empty house and you have incredible drawings and maybe we both need each other. Because I looked at you and saw a daughter, not a disability. And that's what family's supposed to be. People who see you. 3 months after Victoria promised to visit every Saturday, she'd kept that promise with the consistency that taught Amara trust was possible. Showing up every single weekend without fail regardless of business travel or board meetings or the 1,000 obligations that billionaire CEOs could use as excuses. Bringing art supplies because Amara loved drawing, professional pencils and sketchbooks and watercolors that the orphanage would never budget for, because why invest in developing talents for children who might never leave? Victoria had filed adoption paperwork immediately after that first meeting, had hired lawyers to expedite the process that usually took 12 to 18 months, but wealth and connections and aggressive legal advocacy compressed into 3 months, had completed the home study where social workers evaluated her house and finances and capacity to parent a disabled child, had passed background checks that confirmed what everyone already knew, that she had resources and stability and genuine commitment to raising Amara. Medical evaluations had confirmed that Victoria understood Amara's spina bifida, understood the accessibility requirements and occasional medical needs, and the reality that wheelchairs were part of their family's life, not obstacles to overcome, but simply how Amara's body worked. That Victoria could handle what the orphanage director had called complications, as if loving a disabled child was impossibly difficult, rather than just requiring the same commitment any child deserved. The adoption was approved in 3 months, faster than typical because Victoria's wealth allowed her to hire the best lawyers and because judges recognized genuine commitment when they saw it, because nothing in the evaluation suggested anything except that Amara would thrive with a mother who saw her. At the court hearing to finalize the adoption, the judge asked Amara the question that mattered most, the question that gave the 12-year-old agency in determining her own future, rather than treating her as passive recipient of adult decisions. Do you want Victoria to be your mother? Yes, Amara said through tears that represented 7 years of believing no one would ever ask that question. 7 years of watching other children get chosen while she remained unchosen. She's the only person who ever saw me, not my wheelchair, not my disability, not the complications everyone kept warning her about. Just me. The judge granted the adoption with the particular satisfaction of someone who understood they were correcting systemic injustice, declared Amara officially Victoria Chen's daughter, transformed a child who'd been invisible into a child who belonged. On moving day, Victoria brought Amara to the house that would be their home, a house Victoria had spent 3 months renovating while the adoption processed, making it fully accessible with ramps instead of stairs and wide doorways that accommodated wheelchairs and a roll-in shower that didn't require transfers that might be difficult. Modifications that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, but mattered more than any other investment Victoria had ever made, because this was about making sure Amara's home actually worked for her body. Amara's room had been converted into an art studio. Walls painted the colors Amara had mentioned liking during their Saturday visits, equipped with easels and professional paints and supplies that recognized her talent deserved development, that her drawings weren't just hobby, but genuine artistic skill that should be encouraged. "You did all this for me?" Amara asked through tears, overwhelmed by the reality of a room designed around her needs and interests, rather than around what was convenient for able-bodied people or what orphanages could afford on limited budgets. "You're my daughter," Victoria said simply, the statement carrying everything that mattered. "Of course I did. This is your home. It should work for you." 6 months after Amara moved in, she was thriving in ways that proved the unadoptable label had never been about her capabilities. Was attending a private school that was fully accessible and had experience supporting disabled students. Had friends for the first time because stability and belonging gave her confidence to connect with peers, because being chosen had taught her she was worth knowing. Her artwork was exceptional, the talent that had been developing in orphanage sketchbooks now flourishing with professional supplies and encouragement from Victoria, who enrolled her in classes and brought her to galleries and treated her art as serious pursuit worthy of investment. Victoria encouraged Amara to enter a youth art competition, helped her prepare a portfolio, supported her through the submission process that would have been impossible from an orphanage where no one was investing in disabled children's talents. Amara won first place, her painting selected from hundreds of submissions to be displayed in a downtown gallery. The subject a portrait titled, "Finding Home Showing Victoria," Amara's way of expressing what having a mother meant after 7 years of having no one. At the gallery opening where Amara's painting was center of the exhibition, where 12-year-old disabled Black girl was being celebrated as artist rather than dismissed as unadoptable, a journalist asked what had inspired the painting, asked Amara to explain the portrait that had won first place. "My mom," Amara said, the word mom coming easily now after 6 months of learning that Victoria wasn't disappearing, that chosen family was permanent. "She saw me when I was invisible." The journalist asked what she meant, giving Amara a platform to articulate what institutional ableism had felt like, what being deemed unworthy of family had done to a child who deserved better. "I was in an orphanage for 7 years, Amara explained to the journalist and the gallery attendees who'd gathered to listen. "People walked past me like I wasn't there. Staff positioned me in corners where prospective parents wouldn't see me. Because I use a wheelchair, they thought I wasn't worth knowing, wasn't worth introducing to families, wasn't worth the effort of accessibility modifications or medical care that any child might need. They called me complicated, like that explained why I didn't deserve a family. My mom looked at me and saw a daughter, not a disability, saw a child who needed a family, not a burden that was too expensive or difficult. She chose to see me when everyone else had decided I was invisible." 1 year after the adoption, Victoria started Amara's Voice Foundation with the mission of challenging the unadoptable label that kept disabled children in institutions when families would choose them if given the chance. Providing resources and funding for families who wanted to adopt disabled children but couldn't afford the accessibility modifications or medical care that adoption agencies presented as insurmountable obstacles. The foundation focused specifically on adopting children with disabilities, matching kids with families, and providing financial support for adaptive homes and ongoing medical needs, proving that the barrier wasn't lack of families willing to adopt disabled children, but lack of resources and systemic support for making those adoptions successful. Amara was the face of the foundation, shared her story publicly at fundraisers and conferences and media interviews, advocated for disabled children in foster care with the authority of someone who'd lived the experience she was describing. Who could articulate exactly what being deemed unadoptable felt like and exactly what changed when someone chose to see you? She spoke at schools and community centers and anywhere people would listen about how disability doesn't make children less deserving of families, how wheelchairs don't make you unlovable, how the complicated label was about ableism, not about actual challenges that loving parents couldn't handle. Victoria and Amara returned to Riverside Children's Home 1 year after the adoption, returned not as visitor and resident, but as mother and daughter, as proof that the unadoptable label was lie, returned with a $2 million donation for accessibility renovations that would make the orphanage actually accessible to the disabled children who lived there. Ramps and elevators and bathrooms that work for wheelchairs. Modifications that should have existed years ago, but funding and priority had gone elsewhere. Amara spoke to the current residents, spoke specifically to the disabled children who were being positioned in corners and deemed unadoptable, and taught that their wheelchairs made them unworthy. "I thought no one would ever choose me," Amara told them, 13 years old now, and confident in ways that 12-year-old Amara, sitting alone in corners, couldn't have imagined. "I thought being in a wheelchair made me broken. Staff told me I was too complicated, that families couldn't handle my needs, that I should accept I'd probably age out of the system alone. But I wasn't broken. The system was. The system that decided disabled children weren't worth introducing to prospective parents, that decided wheelchairs made you unworthy of families, that decided physical difference meant you should be hidden away. And there's a family out there for you too, someone who will see you, not your disability, someone who will choose you not despite your wheelchair, but including everything that makes you who you are." In the car driving home from Riverside, Amara said to Victoria what she'd been wanting to say for a year, what 7 years of believing she was unwanted had made difficult to articulate. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for looking at me when everyone else looked past me, for choosing me when the world had decided no one would, for making me your daughter when I'd spent 7 years believing I'd never be anyone's child. Thank you for letting me be your mom," Victoria said, tears streaming down her face because the gratitude went both ways. Because Amara had filled spaces in Victoria's life she hadn't known were empty, because chosen family mattered as much as biological family, because being Amara's mother was the most important thing Victoria had ever done. "I drew you something," Amara said, pulling out her sketchbook, showing Victoria a new drawing labeled "My Family," a portrait of both of them. Amara in her wheelchair and Victoria beside her, both smiling, both belonging. The family that existed because one person had chosen to see when everyone else had looked away. "It's perfect," Victoria said, her voice breaking on the words. "You're perfect, not despite your wheelchair or your disability or anything the orphanage called complicated. Perfect because you're my daughter and you're exactly who you're supposed to be." Victoria Chen walked into Riverside Children's Home at 2:15 p.m. on a Saturday and saw 12-year-old Amara Williams sitting alone in her wheelchair in the corner, while every other child was introduced to prospective parents. And when Victoria asked what about her, the director said, "Oh, you don't want her. She's complicated," revealing in one sentence years of ableism that had convinced staff that a black girl in a wheelchair was unadoptable, unworthy of family, too broken to deserve love, too expensive and difficult and medically complex for families to handle, even though the complications were mostly about society's unwillingness to accommodate wheelchairs rather than about Amara's actual needs. It wasn't about Amara being complicated. It was about a system that decided disabled children weren't worth the effort. That being in a wheelchair made you invisible. That physical difference meant you should be hidden away in corners where prospective parents wouldn't have to see you and feel uncomfortable about not choosing you. That ableism could disguise itself as practical concern about what families could handle. Victoria didn't see a complicated child when she looked at Amara. She saw a daughter, saw a 12-year-old who'd spent 7 years watching other children get chosen while she remained unchosen, who'd learned to protect herself from disappointment by expecting nothing, who drew pictures of families she didn't have because longing for belonging was all she had left. And in choosing to see Amara when everyone else looked past her, in refusing to accept the unadoptable label that institutions had attached to disabled children, in spending 3 months fighting through adoption bureaucracy and hundreds of thousands of dollars making her house accessible, and every Saturday for a year keeping promises that taught Amara trust was possible, Victoria taught her daughter that disability doesn't determine worth, that wheelchairs don't make you unlovable, that physical difference doesn't mean you deserve to be hidden away and forgotten, and that sometimes the perfect family is the one that chooses you when the world has decided no one will. When institutions have labeled you too complicated, when 7 years have passed and everyone except you has given up hope that anyone will see you. Sometimes the children who've been waiting longest to be seen are the ones who deserve families most. The ones who've learned to be invisible because visibility only led to rejection. The ones whose wheelchairs made them inconvenient for systems built around able-bodied assumptions. Do you believe every child deserves a family regardless of disability, regardless of whether they use wheelchairs or have medical needs or require accessibility modifications that cost money and effort? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and rate this story on a scale of 0 to 10. Because somewhere right now, a disabled child is sitting in a corner at an adoption event being deliberately not introduced to prospective parents because staff have decided their wheelchair makes them unadoptable. And maybe someone needs to know that complicated is just ableism disguised as concern. That disabled children are worthy of families. That choosing to see the invisible child changes 2 lives. The child who finally belongs, and the parent who discovers that love has nothing to do with whether someone's body works the way society expects it to.